Many of the cases we cover on Desi Crime, the cases you usually hear on true crime podcasts, the cases we usually cover, have a clear perpetrator and a clear victim. But some cases are not so cut and dry. Sometimes these kinds of cases can flip our perception of what is wrong and what is right, what is good and what is evil. Today's story is one of these grey area cases. It's a story of a woman abused, tormented and emotionally tortured until one day she snapped. This is the story of Dr. Chamari Liyanage. Hey everyone, I'm Aishwarya.
And I'm Aidan.
And together we make up the Desi Crime podcast.
This is where we tell you true crime stories that differ from the mainstream.
Untold stories of Desi killers, Desi cases, and Desi crime.
And speaking of Desi, Aishwarya, today we go to a part of the Desi community that is sometimes forgotten in the conversation of the diaspora, which is Sri Lanka. And today's case involves domestic abuse and happens to be from that part of the world.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a tough story to tell.
It is, and I think this case grapples with two really important aspects. One is the moral questions that it poses, which are deeply significant and important to be discussed. But second is just bringing light to how much domestic violence there is in the South Asian community. For example, I have the stat here. According to UN Women, approximately 33% of all women aged between 15 and 50 experience domestic violence at the hands of a current or former male partner. In 2017, 20,000 women died at the hands of a male partner in Asia alone, making Asia the continent with the highest female killing rate anywhere in the world.
Aishwarya, I'll be honest. I'm sure this story didn't get the attention it deserved by the fact that as a true crime podcaster, I've never even heard of it.
Yeah.
So that's just tragic because the multitude of these stories, one after the other in our newspapers, is terrible.
No, it's crazy. And this story did get attention for that short period of time in Sri Lanka. It got it in Australia where the case actually took place, but I think it missed that limelight in other Desi communities. To tell you this harrowing story though, I have to take you to Australia in 2014, where in the small West Australian town of Geraldton at 6:30 a.m. on June 24th, a 33-year-old woman dialed the emergency number 000. When the 000 operator answered the phone, the woman on the other line was crying, claiming she couldn't remember what had happened. This woman was Dr. Chamari Liyanage, a Sri Lankan immigrant who had moved to Australia in 2011 to follow her husband, Dr. Dinendra Athukurala. The pair had met 5 years back in 2009 while working at the Colombo North Teaching Hospital in Sri Lanka. The two had fallen madly in love. Dinendra was charming, outgoing, and a deeply caring and generous person. When the two first met, it seemed like destiny. But 5 years later, in their Australian home, things had not gone all right. Something happened that compelled Chamari to call for help. When the police arrived at the couple's home, they saw a scene straight out of a horror film. Chamari was lying in the fetal position on the lounge room floor, covered in blood. The emergency responders asked if she remembered what had happened, but Chamari said she couldn't remember anything. The police decided to search the house to see if they could find out what had happened. When officers entered the couple's bedroom, they saw someone lying on the bed. But when they looked around the room, it was clear whoever was on the bed wasn't sleeping. Blood was splattered all over the walls and ceiling. As they creeped closer to the body, they could see the bed was also covered in blood. A pillow lay over the body's head. When they removed it, they could see who it was. Chamari's 34-year-old husband, Dinendra, was on the bed, dead. From the house, the police also recovered what they expected to be the murder weapon, a 1.8 kilogram mallet covered with blood. There were no signs of a struggle on Dinendra's body, prompting the police to guess that Dinendra was bludgeoned to death in his sleep. There was also no sign of forced entry into the house. Nothing was stolen, nothing was ransacked, no cupboards were broken into. Everything seemed completely intact. The only lead the police had was Chamari. But why would she allegedly murder her husband in cold blood?
So clearly all the signs are pointing towards Chamari, right? The lack of a forced entry and the way the scene is set up. But of course, you're forced to ask yourself, if she did murder her own, husband, why would she call the emergency responders? But that reminds me of Anu Singh all over again, where Anu Singh did that and she ended up calling 000. It was in Australia, in fact. So if she did murder her husband, why would she call the emergency responders?
No, it's definitely peculiar the way she behaved. She called the emergency responders despite possibly being the one that killed her husband. She didn't plan this any better. She didn't make a run for it after she committed this crime. But Aidan, all of this actually just goes on to give legitimacy to her reason for why she killed her husband. While being interrogated by police, Chamari actually never admitted to killing Dhirendra, or Din as she affectionately called him. But she didn't deny it either. She claimed to not remember what happened that night. She said she remembered the previous night when she shut her laptop and crawled into bed with Dhirendra. After that though, she said the next thing she remembered was standing on the side of the bed and looking over at her husband's dead body, which prompted her to call 000. But the evidence was pretty decisive. Chamari killed Dhirendra. 2 days after the murder, on June 26, 2014, Chamari was charged with murder. She took full responsibility for what had happened. In her appeal before the court case began, she said, "I would also like you to consider my personal circumstances leading to the offense. I was a victim of a long-term abusive and violent relationship, and I believe that my judgment had been affected and considerably impaired at the time." Considering her circumstances, she said, the chances that she would be a repeat offender were non-existent. But when the court asked her how she planned to plead, Chamari said not guilty. Chamari claimed she wasn't a cold-blooded killer. Rather, she was a battered, abused woman who couldn't figure out a way out of a cycle of deep physical, sexual, emotional, and financial abuse. When her trial began, all of Australia tuned in. Many in the public claimed she could have just left Dhirendra. They admitted that her alleged abuse was unfortunate, but murder was not the only way out. Others disagreed though, calling domestic abuse a complex issue involving control and manipulation, all of which made it hard for so many women to just get up and leave. Murder was truly her only way out, at least in her mind, they say.
Aishwarya, I'm sure you will get to the details of the emotional, financial, physical abuse she faced. And I'm sure they will to an extent justify or at least explain some of her actions. But my stance on this, and it might change as the case progresses, is it's a matter of precedent more than what feels like justice. It's a matter of not allowing murder as a form of taking vendetta out on somebody. That is why we shouldn't just let her go, and that is why she should be guilty. And I'm sure you'll get to what happened, but it's just my gut response is she is guilty.
I feel like, Aidan, though this case is a little more complicated, just considering the one fact that she doesn't remember killing him. If she is telling the truth about that, this case is unlike the others. This wasn't really her taking the vendetta out. This might just be a consequence of deep emotional trauma. And that's when we have psychologists come in and weigh in on the issue. Is it possible that she truly just doesn't remember killing her partner? Throughout the 3-week-long trial, details of Chamari and Dhirendra's relationship started to surface. And as more details were released, the more the scales started to tip in her favor. Only few in the public had heard of cases of domestic abuse this horrific. Domestic abuse that wasn't just physical. It was emotional and psychological and financial and sexual. In the beginning of their relationship, while the couple was still living in Sri Lanka, Dhinendra cheated on Chamari multiple times. Every time, he would tell her that he'd never do it again. But it wasn't long until she would undoubtedly uncover a new affair. Even when the couple was together, he would tell Chamari about his sexual escapades in the past with other women. Chamari saw no way out. The constant betrayal, lying, and deceit was bringing her to a breaking point. And unfortunately, in 2010, Chamari attempted suicide for the first time. Dhinendra was able to stop her by promising her to never betray her again. But a few months later, he cheated on her again. In late 2010, when Chamari was talking about her sister's wedding plans, Dhinendra decided it was time to propose. He asked her to marry him before he could change his mind. But once Chamari agreed to marry Dhinendra, the relationship only went further downhill. Dinendra disallowed any of Chamari's friends to come to the wedding. He threw a huge fit when he found out that her parents had invited 50 guests to the wedding. While on their honeymoon in Chennai in India, Dinendra even asked Chamari if he could hire a prostitute while on their honeymoon, but she refused. And things only got progressively worse. Once the couple returned from their honeymoon, Dinendra created an email account for Chamari that he had complete control over. He even demanded she change her medical specialty from anesthesia to pathology. After the couple were married, he continued to invite his past girlfriends to their home and disappear with them into the couple's bedroom. While Dinendra was in Australia and Chamari in Sri Lanka, Dinendra put her phone number on a website for sex workers, which led to her getting random calls and text messages from strangers. He asked her to Skype with him from 6 p.m. each day until the wee hours of the night, despite Chamari asking for time to study. All of this distraction led to Chamari failing her pathology exam in 2011. Then, towards the end of 2011, Chamari finally moved to Australia to be with Dinendra. When she arrived, the nature of the couple's relationship and the nature of Dinendra's abuse shifted. While at work one afternoon, the couple was speaking to each other on the phone when Chamari asked Dinendra to hold the line so she could help an Aboriginal woman and her children on the street. Dinendra demanded she stop talking to the lady, but Chamari disobeyed. When Chamari went back home later in the day, Dinendra hit her on the back of her head and she fell hard to the ground. I was so scared of him from that day, a lot, because he hit me so much I couldn't even breathe. I was so scared of him and I didn't want to do anything wrong because I don't know whether he's going to hit me again. So I tried my best not to do anything to make him angry and tried to stay calm and silent, not to argue or not to do anything. She was beaten up heavily and regularly. Wooden rolling pins, metal chairs, wooden spoons, small metal balls from a slingshot, anything Dinendra could get his hands on. He also hit her with his knees and his elbows, pulled her hair, slapped her and punched her. He did anything he could to physically dominate her. He would beat her up if she refused to watch porn with him, or if she refused to find other women for him, or if she failed to establish a friendship with other women. When the couple went back to Sri Lanka for vacation, he invited one of his exes over to their house and hit Chamari in front of her. Despite being a working woman with her own earned money, she found herself with no financial freedom. She couldn't even buy her own groceries without being continuously taunted and criticized for the way she spent money. Over the course of her abusive relationship, she had kept a diary which the court officer read out loud during the proceedings. Aryan, just to get a sense of what was going on in her mind while she was being so deeply abused, could you read what the diary says?
So the diary says, quote, "He plays with me like a cat. I'm a mouse. Until I'm dead, he plays. I'm extremely scared for my life when I see that look in his eyes. Please, God, get me out. Let me die in peace. Please help me." That is gut-wrenching, Aishwarya. Yeah.
The diary had noted in it multiple moments where she had contemplated taking her own life, ending it all, and finding eternal peace. "I was standing on the last stone, looking down to the vast ocean which was about to deliver my eternal peace," said one of her diary entries. Chamari tried multiple times to leave her husband, but every time she tried to leave, Dinendra would threaten her and her family and her friends. But what scared Chamari the most were the threats Dinendra made towards her sister and her sister's 2 children back in Sri Lanka. In her stressed mental state, she believed Dinendra was genuinely capable of harming her family. Victoria Cook, the family and domestic violence expert who was brought in to interview Chamari and provide testimony to the court, said, "It's a very common and normal phenomenon for those living with coercive control in the context of high-risk experiences of abuse and violence to refrain or be exceedingly careful about help-seeking, or to experience fluctuating help-seeking due to the level of fear and the belief that others or self will be killed or seriously harmed if police became involved." Cook claimed Chamari stayed in the relationship because of how Dinendra had portrayed himself early on in the relationship by initially charming Chamari and then emotionally manipulating and isolating her. There are also cultural factors involved in why Chamari chose not to leave. At one point when she tried to leave, her mother-in-law pleaded with her to stay.
Aishwarya, the cultural factors cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
As South Asians, we take pride in having some of the lowest divorce rates in the world, and we scoff at the West for having a 50-50 chance in a marriage resulting in divorce.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is we keep more toxic relationships intact due to family interventions. I mean, I know from personal experience where you clearly have a relationship which is not working for either of the parties, but the family will come together and band behind them as if it is something sanctimonious to retain that relationship as one.
And I think the worst part is that more often than not, the family's solution to the problems is have a child.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of perpetuates this cycle of abuse and toxicity that transfers on from generation to generation. And it's deeply troubling. If the 70% divorce rate of Scandinavian countries isn't healthy, the 1% divorce rate of India is nothing to be happy about.
Right.
In the evenings, Dinendra would turn on Skype, ask Chamari to undress, and perform sex acts on her for random strangers live on the internet. One of Chamari's closest friends, D. Budge, came forward to say the thing that caused the biggest shame. He used to wake her in the early hours for his Skype sessions, these websites where they exchange videos, porn videos, and he used to trade videos of her with whatever he was looking at. By whatever he was looking at, D. Budge referred to abhorrent videos. Dinendra would exchange videos of his wife with pornographic videos involving children and animals. Not only did he have these images for his own pleasure, he would force his wife to watch videos repeatedly with him. His obsession with young girls didn't just end at the videos and images though. He forced Chamari to reach out to young girls and begin intimate relationships with them. He would force her to invite the women over to the couple's apartment, where he would force his wife into sexual acts and watch or join in himself. One woman, a 17-year-old named Kay in the court documents, came forward to confirm that she would often go over to the couple's house for dinners and was once even asked to shower with Chamari. Dinendra recorded the entire incident on his camera, asking the young girl questions like, "Do you have a boyfriend?" touching her inappropriately, and eventually joining the two women in the shower. The couple brought Kay a camera and spent one of their evenings teaching her how to take explicit photographs and videos.
Aishwarya, you remember the highfalutin legal analysis I gave at the beginning?
Yep.
Scratch that. I take it all back. This doesn't make sense.
No, I know. The more you keep hearing the story, the more the court documents came out. Everyone was like, all right, this is by no stretch of the imagination a regular marriage, first of all. And secondly, this is unlike anyone has ever heard anything
Yeah,
about.
this is not what comes to mind when you hear domestic abuse.
No, it's not. He was clearly a sick man on multiple levels. When Kay narrated the details to the court, Chamari cried. "She did this to protect me and my mum," said the young girl. Despite all these narrations of abuse though, one fact was certain, and both the defense and the prosecution acknowledged that when Chamari picked up the mallet and killed her husband, she was not in immediate danger. During the evening of Monday 23rd June 2014, the accused and the deceased were at their home address alone. They argued about a work-related matter before retiring to their bedroom. This work-related matter was Dinendra ordering Chamari to apply for a study leave from work so they could take Kay on a holiday together. During that evening or in the early hours of the morning, the deceased spoke to his brother in Sri Lanka by telephone. At some point thereafter, the accused obtained a metal hammer from a cupboard in the corridor of the unit, returned to the bedroom, and struck the deceased to the head. At the time the deceased was lying on the bed, at least 2 blows were inflicted, causing extensive blunt force trauma injuries to the head and neck and resulting in substantial blood loss. But the defense had 2 rather strong counters to this objection. Sure, Chamari wasn't in immediate danger, but her actions were motivated by a belief that Dinendra was going to harm her, like he had already been doing for years. She believed her actions to be necessary to protect herself from harm. Therefore, her actions were a reasonable response. But the defense acknowledged that there was a problem with this argument. There was no way to prove it, since Chamari had always maintained she had no memory of killing her husband. If she has no memory of killing him, she has no memory of why she chose to kill him in that specific moment. But the fact that she couldn't remember anything became the defense's second argument. Her actions occurred in a state of non-insane automatism, they claimed, and they brought into court 2 psychiatrists to testify to this phenomena. Over the course of 3 weeks, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that Chamari had suffered terribly. Justice Stephen Hall called Dinendra a quote, manipulative and merciless offender. The saddest part of it all was that Chamari wasn't afraid or hesitant about going to prison. The prison cell felt freeing to her, since for so many years her own home felt like a prison. In a move that left everyone with a sense of justice done right, the court decided to find Chamari not guilty of the murder of Dinendra Athukurala. Instead, Chamari was found guilty for manslaughter, a lesser charge with a sentence of 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2. Chamari had already spent 18 months in jail though, which the court decided to include as part of her sentence. While in prison, she found a passion for painting. When I got to prison, it was a safe haven. I found my own peace in my mind and in my heart, and it let me explore myself and be myself, she told 730. Then 19-year-old Kay also went to visit Chamari in prison. When we got there, we all hugged and cried. My mum was comforting her. Liyanage said she was very sorry. She said she feels very sorry for mum and that we happened to be a part of this. Just 6 months after the trial ended, Chamari put in an appeal for her parole and was accepted. She walked out of the prison a free woman, free in more ways than one. But she still walked into more problems. Her medical license had been revoked for 5 years, and the immigration office had decided to revoke her visa, ordering her back to Sri Lanka. But Australians weren't willing to accept that. People protested. Her friends spoke out in her support. Change.org petitions were signed. Lawyers and activists wrote letters. And the government listened. The immigration office reversed its original decision and allowed Chamari to retain her visa and renew it if she desired to stay in Australia. As of a few years ago, Chamari was still not practicing medicine but was busy enjoying the finer pleasures of life that she had been devoid of for so long. Just the act of going grocery shopping without fear was liberating to her, she said in an interview. I knew all about domestic violence myself as a medical officer. I've seen it and I've dealt with it. But in my own life, I was trapped and I was isolated and I couldn't talk about it. So people have to understand that no matter how intelligent, no matter how independent, it's difficult for people to come out and ask for help.
I have to admit, it was difficult, extremely difficult. But now, if I can help at least one more person to change their lives, who's experienced the similar things, who's going through similar situations, I would be very glad.